Hi, this is Russell Stannard from teachertrainingvideos.com. I've been running a flipped classroom course online now for about 5 years, and one of the most common questions is, Russell, what's the difference between blended learning and flipped classroom? So that's what we're going to deal with. This video is going to look at blended learning and flipped classroom and how they are different and how they are similar. Really hope you like the video. If you do, as always, please like it, please share it, please leave any comments you can. Let's get straight into it. Now, the first thing to say is the flipped classroom is a form of blended learning. A blended learning course really is a combination of face-to-face teaching, that's in the class teaching, which is often just kind of traditional teaching, but it may include technology, and then on homework, which is normally now an online component. It's not always, again, it could mean going to the library, etc. But normally, when we look at most teachers, when I go into observed classes, what I'm seeing is a combination of face-to-face teaching with a little bit of technology in it, and then the homework, which is often online. But not always, and that is a blend. Now, flipped classroom is exactly the same. Okay, so flipped classroom is a combination of face-to-face teaching, sometimes with technology, and then an online component, which is the homework, the stuff that you do at home, which is often using technology. Again, not always, but normally most of the time. So they are actually the same. The difference is, first of all, the way the two types of organisation of learning evolved, and the principles that underpin the blended learning and flipped classroom. So let's look first of all at how the two ideas evolved. So if we think about blended learning, what we really have is a case where learning was traditional. So in other words, it was normally paper-based around books and around articles, perhaps photocopies. And slowly, both what we do in the classroom and even what we do for homework began to change as we substituted and introduced technologies into the lesson. So basically what we're trying to do is take parts of a traditional lesson out and bring in technology to replace it. So it's very much based on a kind of really on substitution and the choices of why we would substitute and take out what we were doing traditionally and then bring in technology. Those choices are really important in terms of the blend, and we'll come back to that in a minute. So essentially, when we look at blended learning, particularly originally, it was very much, this is our traditional classroom, both in the class and homework. Now we're going to introduce technology into that lesson and take out things that we did in a more traditional way and then start doing them with technology. Now, we could argue that this process has been going on for years, because there are examples of teaching and learning in the 1950s, 1940s, using radio, using television, etc. But where it really started was with the introduction of digital technologies that made that substitution process much more prevalent, and therefore we're making much greater use of technology both in the class and particularly for homework. So you can almost think of blended learning like a puzzle. So in other words, you're looking at your class and you're saying to yourself, well, now that we've got different technologies that we can use, Edmodo and Kahoot and YouTube and Google, etc., maybe this part of the lesson we're going to take it out and then we're going to introduce a technology into that part of the lesson. So it's almost like a puzzle where you're kind of pulling parts of the lesson out and you're putting parts in. But in doing that, of course, you slightly reshape the lesson as well. So the nature of learning has changed as more and more of this substitution is taking place. Now, there's another really interesting thing about blended learning. This is something that I've really experienced, because when first started working, I was often taking a course that I had and taking bits of that course out and introducing technology into it. And because the course already had a basic structure that was based on a more traditional form of learning, that substitution was often quite awkward and it wasn't well planned. I'd say, oh, okay, I'm going to use that instead of this. So I would be taking out parts of a traditional lesson and bringing in technology, but I was actually adding the technology in rather than planning the two together. Now lots of courses are kind of built and created, and I've done it myself, or I've built a course or organised a course and written out a syllabus, and right from the start I've planned the combination of the face-to-face and the technological part together. So they've been planned together, so it's much more coherent. A lot of the old blended learning courses were often based on a traditional lesson where we suddenly added technology in. So blended learning has really evolved, particularly in the way that we plan and organise it. Now the flipped classroom is really different. The flipped classroom really is based on Bloom's taxonomy. There was even an idea before the flipped classroom called the inverted classroom, which was kind of similar. So it was looking at this idea that if we think about traditional learning, often in the classroom we teach the lower order thinking. We give the basic information. If we're doing a lecture teaching the students about the fall of the Roman Empire, we give them the information, they take notes, we might get them to discuss a few things, but basically we're just teaching them the basic information. And then for homework we might ask them to go home and then to maybe write a comparative essay of the fall of the Roman Empire and the fall of the Persian Empire. So they then do the higher order thinking skills at home. They get the basic information from their lecturer, but then the kind of evaluating, the analysing, the applying the knowledge, using the knowledge, they actually do that at home when they do their homework. And people started to say, well, can't we flip that? Can't we get the students to do the lower order thinking skills at home by watching videos or listening to podcasts and getting the basic information? And then in the classroom, they can do more group work and more pair work where they're working together and the teacher is in the room. And at that stage, they then start doing their comparative work where they, for example, discuss the fall of the Roman Empire in comparison to the fall of the Persian Empire. But now the teacher is there. So it's very much about Bloom's taxonomy, lower order thinking skills, now do them at home, not in the class, do them at home, and higher order thinking skills, do them in the class while the teacher is there, and then you can work in groups when you do those activities. And it really makes sense because often when we're doing higher order thinking skills, we need that kind of dynamic of the group work activity, the kind of constructivist approach to learning, that idea of sharing ideas, debating, discussing things to really kind of really mold our knowledge and really turn information into knowledge that then we can then manipulate and use. So blended learning and flipped classroom are coming from two very different traditions, even though both of them are based on the use of technology and the use of face-to-face teaching. Now another thing about the flipped classroom is that there's almost two theories of learning, one based on the homework and one based in the class. Now I don't want to over exaggerate this because I know from some of the recent research that that's beginning to change, but normally when we're working at home, we're looking at a video or we're reading an article and then we're doing some type of activity to check our understanding. So we're doing lower order thinking skills and we're kind of working in a very behaviourist way. Collect the information into your head and just check it and make sure you understand it. That's a very kind of traditional behaviourist way of looking at learning, and it's very individual based. Now the classwork is very much based on Vygotsky. It's based on the idea that in the class we're going to discuss things, we're going to use this knowledge. So we're going to discuss things, we're going to work in groups, we're going to process the knowledge, and we're looking at higher order thinking skills. So now we're using a constructivist theory of learning, and it's much more group based and task based. So you've almost got two theories of learning kind of working together when you're working in the flipped classroom, and they're very clearly divided because you do the homework is the behaviourist part and the classroom is going to be more constructivist based. Now in a flipped classroom, in a blended learning, that's not so clear. You'd be matching behaviourism and constructivism both in the work that you do in the class and in the work you do at home. You might be combining them in different ways, but in the flipped classroom you're clearly defining them and combining them depending on Bloom's taxonomy. So that's another very interesting difference. Now we'll point out one thing. What some of the research is showing is that when students do the homework these days, they might connect with another friend. So actually some of the homework that they do now, even in a flipped classroom, tends to be a little bit more constructivist in approach, and it may include the use of group work activities, connecting with each other on Skype, using Google Docs, for example, to collaborate together. So there are signs now that this is slightly changing, but traditionally, behaviourism at home, traditional way of learning, read information, check you understand it, a more Vykotskyan constructivist approach, collaborative approach to learning in the classroom, discussing things, comparing, contrasting, working together. So to summarise, both blended and flipped learning are forms of blended learning. That is, they are forms of learning that include a combination of some face-to-face aspect to the teaching and learning and an online component. And that online component can be used both in the classroom and for homework, though obviously it's used more for homework. Now, the blended learning evolved from a traditional class where the teacher began to substitute the traditional lesson, take different parts of it out and introduce technology into the teaching and learning. And particularly at the beginning, that often involved a traditional lesson that you kind of added to and therefore you had to take away from as well. And that was actually one of the problems. So one of the things about blended learning is that as technology has evolved and as time has evolved, many of the courses that we write now and devise now, we build them from the beginning as a blended learning course rather than as a traditional course that we add to by using technology. There's no real theory in blended learning. Our choices about what to do and when to use technology are all based on really our conception that, okay, if we do technology in, or introduce technology into this part of the lesson, it's going to make the lesson more interesting, more motivating, more engaging, etc. So our decisions are really all about based around the efficiency of using the technology and its impact on the lesson. When we look at the flipped classroom, the choices really are slightly different. Why we use technology is much more to do with lower order thinking skills and higher order thinking skills. We want to flip our class and make sure that the lower order thinking skills are done by the students at home, so getting the basic understanding of a topic so that when they come into class they can then process and use that information in higher order thinking skills activities where the teacher is there to help them and to support them and facilitate it. So the flipped classroom tends to be based really on two theories of learning that are actually distinctively used. So the classroom stuff tends, or the homework stuff tends to be more behaviourist, students just learning on their own, reading a text, maybe answering some questions or taking some notes. And then the classroom activities that tend to be more group-based, constructivist, working together, doing activities together, collaborating, sharing. So the approach is more constructivist. So there's kind of distinct use of two learning theories. One for the homework, one for the classroom. Where in a blended learning, no, they would be mixed within the lesson. So you'd be using some aspects of behaviourism and some aspects of constructivism both in the class and in the homework. One final point, if someone's to ask me the question which one is easier, I'd say the answer is flipped classroom, because the flipped classroom is kind of clearly segregated. You know exactly the types of activities you're going to ask your students to do at home. They're going to be based on Bloom's lower order thinking skills. It's often going to be the use of video and podcasts and articles for the students to read, and plus some activities. Now, blended learning can be much more difficult because you need to make choices about what you're necessarily going to not do in a kind of traditional way, but rather you're going to use technology for. And I think you have to be very careful in blended learning. In other words, you've got your lesson, you know what works for you, and really you don't want to substitute that for the use of technology unless you're really sure that it's going to benefit your students, it's going to have an impact on their learning, and it's not always easy to do. So blended learning can be quite a tricky skill to develop, and it really develops out of knowledge of a few key technologies that can help you to substitute and make your lessons more effective, more efficient, more engaging and more motivating. It's a very, very tricky skill to really know how to effectively blend your lessons. Hope you liked the video. Hope it's helped you to understand the difference between blended learning and flipped classroom. If you do like the video, please share it, please like it, please any questions then leave them in the comments box and I'll do my best to answer them, and thank you very much. Hope that video was useful. If you're looking for more videos, please come to teachertrainingvideos.com. Loads and loads of videos on the website. Just choose a technology you're interested in and then all the videos are below. If you want to keep up with my work, if you want to keep up with all the new videos I create, if you want to keep up with the webinars I run, the online courses I run, the talks and presentations I give around the world, then please sign up to my newsletter and you'll get updated with all the latest videos and information. The other thing that you can do is also join the YouTube channel, because then you get all the backdated content, hundreds of videos on the YouTube channel now, and slowly that channel's building up. We've got about 10,000 followers, something like that now. Finally, if you do want me to do an online course with you, or you want me to come and present or do a workshop in your institution or at your conference, then please just contact me from my website, particularly if you're looking for online training, you want to do that individually or in groups. Perhaps you want to learn Adobe Connect or Moodle or Edmodo or Camtasia. I do have a great system for delivering online learning that's very interactive, and people find it a very nice, effective way of learning. Then please contact me, and thank you very much.